afternoon and welcome to the latest Transport Technology Forum Fireside Chat. And the evenings have well and truly drawn in. It's certainly getting time to get dark here where I'm broadcasting from. We've got a particularly interesting session for you this afternoon, and one that's particularly key for anyone who's got or is hoping to get Department for Transport money relating to the installation of transport technology solutions. Because, as you know, the department has for some time now been trying to get itself into a better place when it comes to the evaluation of such projects. Clearly, not just transport technology, but all projects, but certainly for the projects that we talk about in the Transport Technology Forum, developing better ways to capture just how effective they are being, or indeed perhaps not effective, but how they could be better, is really important. So I'm very pleased. We've got presentations from Grace Hothersall. We've got a presentation from Jonathan Mann. We may or may not be joined by Darren Capes, who is having technology problems, which somehow seems very, very appropriate. I should say, before we get going, that we're going to follow the normal setup for these events, which will be the two presentations, and then there will be time for you to post questions. I will do my level best to pull the questions out and put them to Jonathan and possibly to Darren if he's able to join us. I will not be putting them, however, to Grace because she wasn't able to be with us today. However, she has very kindly pre-recorded a presentation for us, and you can probably already see that on screen now. So Grace is in the bottom right-hand corner of her presentation. So rather than whitter on from my room here, why don't I say to the team, let's fire up Grace's presentation and hear what she has to say about evaluation guidance and how we should go about finding out whether the things that we're doing are really working.
Hi everyone, I'm Grace Hothersall and I'm a research officer in the Evaluation Centre of Excellence. And our role is to support the development of proportionate and high quality evaluation solutions across the department's activities. Today I'll be speaking about the Intelligent Transport Systems Evaluation Guidance, which we've developed. I'll be discussing why we developed the guidance and who it was developed for, how we developed it, and what the guidance is about. So we developed it due to a need to provide local authorities with clear evaluation guidance for ITS schemes due to the importance of intelligent transport systems. They're a key aspect of the future of transport agenda. They sit within the wider portfolio of connected autonomous vehicles, and the UK government sees this as an important strategic opportunity. And also due to the importance of evaluation. So there's an increased emphasis on the need for evaluation from the centre of government, particularly the Cabinet Office and Treasury. And evaluation is crucial to providing accountability, understanding impact, and learning about what works and what does not work. So a step-by-step guide on how to evaluate an ITS could be a key tool for managers of these schemes. Scheme managers may want to answer questions such as, how can the safety of an ITS scheme be improved? Is value for money being provided? And how can the usability of the technology be improved? And it also can provide the framework for a consistent approach to evaluating these schemes. So how was the guidance developed? We built an understanding of how our guidance would practically be used. So firstly, with discussions with ITS scheme managers in local authorities. So we shared a draft version of our evaluation guidance for them to feedback on. And we learned about various ITS schemes which they were involved with. For example, asset management, for mapping tree locations. And their feedback was that our ITS evaluation guidance combined academic with real-world knowledge, and it covered basic to more complex evaluations. And they suggested that it would be helpful for future-proofing, providing an evaluation framework, and also as an end result evaluation document to be shared. We then develop the guidance from these discussions, implementing their feedback. And the final guidance includes an evaluation checklist, diagrams, examples, and further references. So what is the guidance actually about? Well, firstly, we discuss which intelligent transport systems are in scope. So that includes asset management, smarter parking, opening local authority transport data. And an important question is why evaluate? Well, it could be for various reasons. For example, for the project team, could be for justifying continued funding, demonstrating achievements, for the scheme itself, to inform evidence-based decisions, identify areas of least or greatest success and apply these lessons to other projects, and also avoiding unintended negative consequences, and also for stakeholders or senior staff or ministers. So evaluation results may help to celebrate the scheme's success, and also enable defence of the scheme under scrutiny and provide accountability. And also for the taxpayer and the wider government. So it allows the government to distribute resources optimally, and provide taxpayers with an understanding that resources are being put to good use. So we began the evaluation guidance by providing an overview of theory of change, which can help to plan an evaluation. So the theory of change examines the wider political, economic, social, and environmental context for the scheme and how this affects the scheme. It's used as a starting point to capture the underlying logic of a scheme and enables you to learn about why it exists, why it is important, the resources, inputs, activities that need to go into the scheme to lead to the intended impacts, and the actions the scheme will take, what it will achieve in terms of short and long-term outcomes. And within our guidance, we also provide a step-by-step guide of how to actually develop a theory of change. So this is an example of a logic map, which we have within the guidance. And this is a visual representation of the theory of change, and enables you to plan the evaluation. So it's also important to understand what type of learning is necessary. So an ITS scheme will likely be focused on technical learning. So how well did the technology function? To what extent did driving or vehicle performance change in the ways expected? For example, speed levels. And we also describe behavioural learning within the guidance. So considering if a scheme requires interaction between technology and people for it to operate successfully. And some important questions might be, to what extent did drivers understand the technology? To what extent did drivers use the technology in the correct way? And how did the technology affect drivers' decision making? So the guidance elaborates on when each type of learning is necessary and the type of data which will result from each of these. And the next stage of the guidance was understanding which scheme objectives will inform either technical or behavioural learning. So it's important to plan these using SMART objectives, so specific, measurable, achievable, attributable to the intervention, realistic and time-bound. And examples of SMART objectives for ITS schemes include things such as reduce congestion, reduce fuel usage and emissions, reduce maintenance costs, increasing productivity. The next part of the guidance was understanding how the evaluation findings will actually be used. So they need to meet the needs of scheme stakeholders. The primary stakeholders would be scheme managers, also including local government officials, such as local councillors, and also stakeholder organisations, so highways authorities, and they might want to learn about what extent the schemes have created positive change. And within this section of the guidance, we also cover different types of evaluation evidence, for example, monitoring data. And we talk through questions that can be answered with this data, decisions which can be made, and how learning should account for context and generalisability of the schemes. The next part of the guidance goes through what sort of evaluation is required. So, for example, impact evaluation, understanding the difference the scheme has made and to what extent it meets its objectives, and also process evaluation. So this is more about examining the delivery of the scheme and what can we learn from it. So it focuses more on lessons that you can actually act upon within the intervention to improve it. And this can allow for evidence-based decisions. And the guidance also explains there are 3 different types of counterfactual or control group, go through which are the most robust, when to use each one, and also covers value for money evaluation. The next part of the guidance, it goes through which steps need to be taken in evaluation, design and delivery. And we included a checklist of different steps to take, beginning with embedding evaluation in scheme design from the start, deciding the type of data required, looking for baseline data, and the guidance also goes into detail for each step of these, and we provided some further links. So, for example, where to find useful statistics on emissions or collisions and how to use these in the evaluation. So, our Intelligent Transport Systems evaluation guidance aims to provide managers of these schemes with an understanding of what evaluation is and why it's important to ITS schemes, the type of questions to ask when planning an evaluation, how to decide what type of data is needed, and then how to decide which type of evaluation is needed. Thank you very much, and please do contact me if you have any further comments or queries. Thanks very much.
Right, so hopefully everyone got that. It was fairly brisk canter through the slides, so I doubt whether people on the call would have been able to read them all, but I think our normal practice is to publish the slides if we can on the TTF website. In particular, that theory of change picture that Grace showed, I certainly couldn't read through all of it while it was briefly on the screen, but it'll be there either on our website or within the instructions as a template for people to follow. It's something that we've had to do for one of our projects that we've been working on with the department recently, and it does rather help focus the mind and help you sort of think through, well, why are we doing this? What was it we hoped to achieve? And how are we going to know whether we did? So with no further ado, I am going to invite Jonathan to take centre stage and to complement what Grace has just been saying. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Steve, for that. All right, I'll try and share my right screen. Hopefully, I'll just put myself in slideshow mode. There we go. Can you see that, Steve? Can you? Am I displaying correctly?
Looks right to me.
Good, perfect. Right, hello everyone. Yeah, we've been working ourselves at Capita Real Estate and Infrastructure for quite a few years now in evaluation, working both with Grace's team, Centre of Excellence for Evaluation, but also at the coalface of doing real evaluations, both in terms of pilots such as the A2M2 cooperative ITS pilot, but also other evaluations, detector evaluation, laser scanning evaluation many years ago at roadside accident scenes. etc. So basically what we've done to complement the high level guidance that we also input into, we've produced what we call a detailed evaluation guidance, well, a toolkit really, which dovetails really well with the presentation you've just heard from Grace, as the two sets of documents, like I say, were developed together. And ultimately what we focused on really is then practical guidance to just go that little bit deeper into, once you've digested the high level guidance, what practical steps do you need to do to actually evaluate specific key aspects of particular schemes, with ultimately various templates and advice. So we've distilled these down into the key elements for what has produced a good quality evaluation, but ultimately do the comparable aspect that Grace mentioned. But ultimately also we've got to remain flexible, mindful that we've got to remain flexible to particular scheme evaluators' needs and their budget, because not everyone's got big amounts of money to spend. So it's very much a dip into the evaluation toolkit, you know, like any toolbox really, as you need. So without any further ado, I'll quickly move to the next slide, which just shows the 4 stages of the detailed evaluation toolkit. 2 are labelled, as you see there, as preliminary evaluation stages, and 2 are what we call benefits analysis stages. So the first 2 really are around conducting sort of the technical evaluation aspects Grace mentioned, and also the process evaluation aspects, or in this case, call it function evaluation aspects there, before moving on to the benefit stages, which can be done as a user acceptance, where you're, you know, doing various analysis for users, which I'll describe in more detail, talking to people and, you know, either via interviews or forms, questionnaires, and then ultimately conducting a more detailed impact and benefits analysis in line with the principles that Grace had outlined that ultimately complements, as I say, the high level guidance. And I say one thing you'll find in the toolkit is, any toolkit, there's some very useful practical templates and guidance from real world examples, either evaluating smart parking or GLOSA, the green light optimized speed advisory service, but also other specific services as well as example questionnaires for people. So very much aimed that people can take that toolkit as it comes and use the tool or adapt it for their own purposes. And here on the next slide, what you can see there now is that we've just detailed out, just at a high level, before I go into the detail of each stage, the key content for each of the 4 stages of the toolkit, which are these standalone documents in effect. So stage 1 is technical evaluation. So it covers kind of almost obvious things really around, you know, you're trying to basically verify the system that you've built there initially. So it might include things like geographical coverage, if you've got some kind of cellular or wireless system. Latency, obviously delay through the system will be pretty important. If you're particularly transmitting data of any sort, you want to know that it's meeting the requirements, also that it's accurate, that it's reliable, that it's secure, very important, cybersecurity, and ultimately, is it meeting some of the standards that you might have tried to design the system to, be them, you know, common standards at a detailed level like DataX2, or higher level standards around cooperative ITS solutions, either European standards or other standards that might apply, ISO or more of at a world level. Function evaluation then is really about evaluating the performance at almost the end service point really. So in the case of, say, a phone app or something that's plugging into a vehicle, you know, at that point, the point of delivery really. So there we look at things like quality of service, the HMI, human machine interface, if it applies either on a phone or in a vehicle, for example, the added value of services, and lessons learned. So all things about some of the process improvement aspects that Grace mentioned, but actually giving some very specific examples that marry up well to how successful evaluations have been done on other programs within the UK, but also wider into Europe, for example, on the Connected Roads project. Then ultimately we move on to the user acceptance and impact analysis stages. These don't have to be done together, they can be done separately or just singularly. So user acceptance is all about talking to users of the system, either doing quantitative analysis, which is surveys, or qualitative analysis via user groups or interviews, which I'll talk about more in a minute, and then impact analysis, obviously actually doing the defined measurements Grace talked about, but also a bit more guidance on how to actually define KPIs, what that ultimately then means for the data requirements you might be trying to measure. You know, have you got the setups you need to do that, and ultimately covering simulations, which is a very powerful tool used these days, and also then benefits mapping to actually say what's the business case outputs of all of this. And there's a common theme with the toolkits. They have the same look and feel, and ultimately cover aspects such as research questions that Grace briefly covered, you saw in one of her diagrams, KPIs, so what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to do, and ultimately any example methods and material and templates, including actually for the evaluation report itself, which are very high level, because obviously, you know, we want to give people to give their flexibility about how they report their results. We just want some common tags really, so we can start to compare results better between particularly common services across the UK, but then across different types of similar services. So quickly onto the preliminary stage, technical evaluation. So that should be generally undertaken as this first stage, because this is about verifying the system is built as expected. This, of course, can be done as part of FATs and SATs, factory acceptance tests, site acceptance tests, but this focuses on some key performance indicators that could directly affect the outcome of a subsequent benefits analysis, where technical issues, as we all know, can directly affect an evaluation outcome or what we as users think of the service. We all have problems with apps or with sometimes basic connectivity, and it affects our user experience. Like today, maybe even on you know, using WebEx or something, we might have a poor view of it, even if it was another issue that was causing it, not directly to do with WebEx itself. And ultimately, this provides guidance on how to conduct that high level verification and ultimately give that confidence. So in line with the common themes, we have research questions, we have KPIs, we also detail key inputs around what data you might need, service message tracing and extraction, potential digital maps of the area, and cover 5 sort of main areas there, and ultimately a set of KPIs that fit within each: scoping of the service, the performance of the service, the standards compliance, the interoperability, potentially in continuity of service that might be within the UK across borders between local authorities and national highways, for example, as well as potentially going abroad, you know, with our European colleagues as we cross borders there for trade. And ultimately, there might be some aspect of communications channel performance comparison we do. If we're running short range radio, for example, ITSG5 or cellular or a hybrid of the two, or ultimately some kind of wired network as well, we might want to compare if there's difference between the wired and the wireless performance, for example. And some examples that are in the document, you know, we've tried to give examples. Obviously, some people that read these documents be evaluation experts, but some people might not be. So we try to give examples for each of those KPIs under each of those main areas, examples of how you might want to represent or compare that data to give guidance. So PDR, packet delivery ratio, for example, looks at signal quality versus distance from a RSU for a CITS compliant system. Coverage of cellular or GPS, that's a very more and more very well used barometer for a lot of apps now, both, for example, parking apps, navigation apps, but also a lot of the applications around traffic signal information, hazardous location warning, or in-vehicle signage, you know, all rely on GPS of some sort. So it's sensible to do that evaluation of how good do you have, you know, black spots in your GPS or coverage, and ultimately latency. And one of the key aspects of that is, you know, sometimes you might think you've got you might not realize that you might have some high latency in a part of the system you didn't expect. An example below, for example, this was taken from a real system where we had 1.4 seconds of latency in the back office, which was for a very specific reason, but hadn't been realized and ultimately had a knock-on effect of the performance of the overall service. Then once you've done technical evaluation, the next stage is what we would call validation. So you do verification, is it built right? And validation, is it operating as you expect at that sort of almost end user level? So that ultimately, we have a separate annex for that. So we've design them to be, you know, shorter, more easily digestible annexes. So we split them into 4, and ultimately, obviously, that gives confidence that the functional performance of the ITS scheme meets the expected requirements. So again, you move on to benefits with confidence that when you put real users underneath them or in front of them, that everything is at least operating pretty much as you expect. And then in terms of then more the detailed process underneath that, again, you'll see we've got key inputs, research questions, KPIs for function evaluation. And here we focus on quality of service, the information content accuracy in different settings, for example, the notification accuracy. Did it arrive when you thought it did on the point of the road, for example? The HMI, which is a key aspect of overall acceptance with people, particularly when you've got anything with a phone, a tablet, or it could even be a control room. You know, that you know, equally applies as well. It doesn't all have to be about in-vehicle services. These kind of research questions and KPIs are service agnostic deliberately. And added value of the service. This is something useful to capture where it might be enablement of some previously untapped road benefits, and also any unexpected secondary benefits. Sometimes you can find during evaluation some secondary benefits arise, you know, that might actually be worth feeding back into your business case, for example. And lessons learned, how do you improve that service before maybe full deployment, and potentially how do you maybe evaluate it better in the future, so we can all benefit from people's learnings nationally on their experiences, so we don't have to repeat other people's mistakes when we do our own evaluations. And potentially list the further work required. Now, some of this might be depending on the outcome of technical and functional evaluation, might mean you need to make those improvements before you move on to the benefits capture and evaluation process, because they might be serious enough to affect the user's point of view, but quite a few of them might well be just things you want to note for the future in your reports. So some quick examples here are that you define actually the service at desired behavior. You might talk about display or alert principles, and you might talk about functional constraints dependencies. And then in terms of quality of service, you might ask basic questions such as, what was the information correct? Was it displayed at the correct time? Was it displayed at the correct position, for example, on the road? You know, if you were looking for parking, did it come before you actually passed the car park, you know, turning, for example? And again, there's a lot more detail without too much detail in the document, where we deliberately mix between generic you know, guidance at the high level and then some specific examples that we think you know, people will find useful for particular services that we know are being piloted and trialed and introduced across the UK at the moment. Then finally, once you've done those, I want to quickly touch on the 2 benefits analysis stages, where we've got user acceptance, which is the surveys and interviews. We have a process chart for that, where you can do things on interviews for surveys where you might ask questions before users have experienced the service, and then you can do the same set of questions where after they've used the service, and ultimately then you can do a comparison between acceptability and acceptance. Have they increased or decreased their impression or view of the services after testing? Hopefully they have, but if they've come across problems, or they might have thought something would be not good and it's better than they thought, or it might not have been distracting they thought, but it was, all those kind of things, as well as other methods, psychometrics sort of analysis and data analysis, as well as interviews and focus groups. And this might be applied to the end users of the service, but also stakeholders like road operators, for example. You know, we want to capture all of theirs. And ultimately, there's example questions there as well that you can look in the document. And ultimately, finally here, we come to impacts and benefits analysis. And ultimately, that should be undertaken once you've done those preliminary stages, where we look at the benefits that Grace mentioned, so road safety, traffic efficiency, environment, operational benefits, and we talk about how to set up and measure those. So either using the subjective impact gained from the users and comparing it using log data, actually running controlled test events where you deliberately send users out both with and without those messages, so you can compare basically to a counterfactual of whether it's really changing their behavior, as well as then putting some of that into modeling tools, which is done to sort of scale up to say nationally or in a particular area, how big are the benefits, and ultimately looking at impacting versus cost analysis. And there's some examples here of, again, process driven, giving people ideas about defining field-based KPIs, average speed, maximum speed, what the implications are on then example data requirements and where you might have to get those data sources from. And finally, then we move to benefits versus costs, where there's a whole process that I won't go down now about ultimately getting to the nub of whether you've got a benefit cost ratio and whether you want to do a multi-criteria analysis, such as socioeconomic benefits, to ultimately inform on, is this service worth putting, has it achieved what it meant to, and will it give you the benefits that you expected at the beginning? And so finally then, summary and reflection. I've outlined very quickly, there are 4 stages to this full evaluation toolkit, which have covered those areas below. You may conduct one or all of them to deliver an aspect of an overall evaluation report. Preliminary verification is really important, doing technical and functional of some sort before you move on to your benefits analysis methods of either user acceptance and or impacts and broader benefits analysis. And ultimately, these toolkits, these dip in further detailed guidance, gives a set of processes and assessment criteria to give practical guidance for scheme evaluation managers and evaluators themselves. And it's deliberately supplemented by worked examples and templates, including this high-level template report. And this can be used as is, as some of the questionnaires can be used straight off the bat for some of the services, if they're ones that match your doing, or adapted for specific scheme requirements as needed. So thank you very much. Sorry for rushing that through. There's a lot of detail there, but more than happy to answer questions.
Yes, I know, you're on mute. I'll come off mute. Thank you, Jonathan. So there is, as you say, quite a lot to take in. And again, some of those slides were, let's just say, a little text dense for me to read on screen. So others might have had the same problems, but I think you were simply illustrating that to a large extent, what we've tried to do within this guidance is to provide the sorts of questions people might ask. So not just go and find out whether this is working, but by asking this and by asking these sorts of people. So I wonder, I've got several questions here, and they might not all really be for you, Jonathan, because some of them might be more for the transport department, but let's see where we get to. So my first question is actually about proportionality. When one looks at guidance like this, it can seem a bit daunting, even with all of the examples built in. But if one's doing a fairly small scheme, we might be trying to sort out one junction or to sort a particular traffic flow. I think at the last TTF event, we were talking about trying to sort out a particularly snarled up junction outside a hospital. How would you advise people to approach that and avoid the risk of going overboard?
Yeah, my personal point of view, and that's why we were trying to stress in some of the detailed toolkit that we're not trying to say you should do everything. And I think the main things are to just think about the high level, and the high level guidance is, I think very good for this, is just think at very high level about what are you hoping the scheme will change. So that's your research questions, how you might measure it, and then how you might represent the results. So almost just 3 very high level things there really, and then potentially use the guidance to dip into. But part of the idea as well is that ourselves and Grace and the team are on hand to advise and give support to scheme evaluators, where we can give that in effect free advice to help people set off on the right path where they genuinely are a bit sort of daunted by that reading too many things.
Okay.
And like you say, Steve, it can seem zone, but I would say decide what research questions, what do you want to do, how do you want to measure it, and how do you think those results will inform on that. If you think about those 3 core things, as well as where would you get the data from, that should put you in a good position.
Okay, and one of the questions that's come in is what sort of a proportion of the scheme budget should be being allocated to evaluation? It's probably how long is a piece of string, isn't it? But it should be part of the scheme budget, I think, is probably the first point, isn't it?
Absolutely, Stephen. And one of the key things, and we found it even in bigger evaluations where we're thinking, we as a wider we, and other schemes we've been involved with, larger ones, that we think we're involving it, and a bit like Grace said, and it's so true, design it, design evaluation into the beginning, it's as important, because ultimately if you can't establish what the benefits are, what's the point of doing the scheme? You're not just putting it up for technology's sake, you're doing it for a reason. So yeah, I think I wouldn't want to put a figure or percentage on it, but it's a lot bigger than a lot of people think initially. It's not something you just fit in and rush at the end. If you design it where you think about how you're going to get your data to do any base evaluation, or to make sure it's working technically, but then if you're going to try and measure something, particularly with impact, you've got to think quite carefully about, can I actually really measure it? Because you might have to save money, for example, by saying, well, I'd like to, but actually now I've looked at the practicalities of that, I probably can't measure all the things I want to, so let's just measure these two or one thing, and back it up with some good user acceptance surveys, for example. So I think it's being pragmatic about what you can really do, because what we found is a lot of people are very ambitious in the specification at the beginning, but actually when it comes to actually do it, the real world evaluation, it's actually a lot more difficult than sometimes envisaged, particularly between saying what's the difference before we had the scheme versus after the scheme, and for new technologies that don't necessarily have a baseline like closer and things. So yeah, I think pragmatism is probably the watchword there, but think about it at the very beginning, and then have your idealistic evaluation requirements, but then definitely bring them down to the real world before you actually commit to them.
I think certainly my experience, generally learn from my mistakes rather than learn from anything I've done well, but is if you see this as an integral part of the project from the outset, that's key. If you don't measure the before you've implemented the scheme, you will never know whether your scheme has been effective, because you haven't got a measure of the before. Sounds obvious, actually turns out not to be. And it's all very well looking for a counterfactual, another junction somewhere else that might be similar, but it's not the same. And so at the point you get the go-ahead for the scheme, at the very latest, that's when you should be collecting data on what the performance is now. And that, of course, is going to tell you what data is available to you. The question,
very good point, Steve. Yeah.
And the question I would advise people thinking about this to ask themselves then is, having written in, this is what we're going to evaluate, this is when we're going to do it, this is how we're going to go about it, this is the data we're going to collect, ask yourself this: who's going to do that then? Because if you haven't got somebody allocated to do that, a member of staff, or maybe it's consultants working on the project, then chances are it isn't going to happen. And if you haven't got staff to do it, then you do need to build it in as something either the consultants working on the project or consultants working separately do, but nothing gets done if there isn't somebody there to do it.
Very true, Steve. And we found that with some other big projects where someone thought someone was doing something and someone thought they were doing something else, and yeah, and we got there in the end. But yeah, that initial confusion at the beginning about whose responsibility it was, for example, to do data collection and ultimately then do the data mining, which was actually, it's all very well people talking about data lakes, but I always sort of say about things, if you don't know what's in your lake, you've got to trawl it out and put it all on the shore, and that's no more useful than just having it all in the lake. You want to be fishing with your particular bait, and get the specific fish out, and ultimately maybe have a smaller lake. Not having a load of data you don't need in a lake is not much use either. So there's a lot of things we've learned about that kind of data mining aspect in evaluations, particularly bigger ones, particularly with this real-time data. It's producing data sometimes every second. You get overwhelmed with it very easily.
Yeah. Think spear gun and not drift net.
Yes.
Since we're going to maintain the maritime analogies for a little bit longer here. So I've got another question here. It's about timing, actually. So what do we have to say in the guidance about how long after a scheme has been implemented it should be evaluated? And indeed, should there be repeat evaluations? We've got a point here about how technology is constantly evolving. Should we perhaps be saying you need to look at this every year for a certain period after implementation?
I certainly know in some of the previous, in the previous guys, Highways Agency, obviously Highways England, National Highways, they have that built into some of their, post-implementation scheme evaluations. You know, that's part of it. It might well be in Grace's higher level document, but one of the things I was going to mention was that particularly when you're evaluating new technologies, it's a good idea anyway to do it ongoing, you know, say do after 6 months or a year, and do these longer, particularly when you're doing proper field analysis of people using applications, for example, talking traffic that was implemented, which is cellular based in-vehicle services in the Netherlands. You know, they carried on testing and evaluating over a 2-year period, because sometimes there's a novelty factor where you think people are really reacting to this service, and ultimately there's a bit of a novelty factor to it. And once they get used to it bleeping away in their car, they go, oh, yeah, I'm just ignoring it like everything else. So yeah, I think it's very important to do a revisit after initial, say, intense evaluation period, to do that again, you know, after 12 months, you know, particularly if it's deployed nationally or in a particular region, you know, to potentially, and it could be a light touch evaluation where you maybe just check whether users' opinions have changed. So it could be very low cost, like doing a Survey Monkey, just to check in with people, as well as maybe check some core baseline data. Like you say, you could keep redoing your baseline data after a year and then doing those comparisons as well.
One of the things that you're suggesting is that there are perhaps focus groups, perhaps sounding boards, Survey Monkey, all those sorts of good things. But one of the things that always challenges us in transport, particularly motor road transport, is our customers are in little metal boxes and they don't speak to us. They might sort of wind the window down and shout every now and then, but actually trying to get feedback from our users can be a bit of a nightmare. Have you got any experience or thoughts to offer on that?
Yeah, well, in terms of, I certainly, in terms of some of the pilots we've done, you know, we've targeted particularly groups of people where we've brought them in, or we've obviously COVID. Some of this is pre-COVID, to be fair, but we brought them in and obviously offered some incentives sometimes to bring people in, you know, small ones. You know, a bit like some of the focus groups they use for, you know, new product development in the obviously very commercial world, for example, or food world. You know, there's sort of tasting sessions where, you know, we'll try and target a smaller group of people, and ultimately, if you get the right balance of people, you know, you can then potentially form some wider views about, is that representative of, you know, a particular populace. You know, obviously you want different ages, you know, different backgrounds, social backgrounds ideally, and different, you know, obviously a good mix between, you know, the different, you know, sexes as well. So yeah, it's something we do. In terms of contacting the wider public, I'd probably defer to DFT on that one in terms of, you know, how you would do that. But certainly, yes, you could target areas just by, you know, doing a local advertisement and bringing in. But certainly for pilots, for example, because you know a user base, you can contact those users, and normally you're allowed to do that, because if you're given that data through the vehicle, for example, you know, they've signed some kind of data agreement that maybe gives you that, for certain people, that permission to contact them. So you could contact, you know, like, for example, there's 2 million users using Talking Traffic now, subscribers. Even if you only got like 5% uptake, that would still be a reasonable amount of people that you could check in and say, how are you finding with the service? What's going on? You know, are there other problems? So you could target a proportion, I think, to have like you say, in the UK, and like you say, it's quite difficult to think about contacting the motoring public as a whole.
Or even the motoring public who are routinely driving through a particular junction.
Yes,
but they've got no
true.
desire to stop and talk to me.
No, exactly. So yeah, it'd be certainly something I'd be interested to take feedback from others in the TTF forum, really, about how best you contact that wider group that you might not have a direct link with. You know, certainly if they're using a new subscriber service, then you do have those methods to contact them, because you'll know who they are, as long as obviously they've agreed to have that contact. Sometimes you obviously click it where you say, I don't want to be contacted. So but most people have been happy about sharing their data with some of these, their positional data, etc., with some of these new services. But yeah, you'd have to make sure that you'd followed obviously the UK version of GDPR, and
I was going to say, it's something worth thinking about when you're working out your GDPR wording, when you're inviting people to subscribe and sign up. That probably.
Steve.
Hello.
Steve, can you hear me? It's Darren.
Darren, how nice.
Yes.
We
Sorry
thought
to be so late, but after 3/4 of an hour of wrestling with the technology, I finally managed to connect with the phone. So sorry, I think I've missed most of that, but I have sort of seen the presentations beforehand, so I think I know what was said. Just really like to, so sorry for not being able to introduce Grace's presentation, and I hope it went well. But just really to pick up on that last point, I think a lot of local authorities, and certainly ones I've worked with, have been guilty of believing they can do all this themselves. And what I would say to local authorities is, just in the same as with data and with cybersecurity and a lot of the other new areas that we're having to think about, this type of evaluation really would work better if you reached out to experts, so other people in the local authority who do this, partner organisations such as academia who are very good at designing this type of work. The local authorities should look to bring and build a wide range of skills to deliver this, and not just assume it's something that the transport department can do, as it maybe does with traditional evaluation processes.
Okay, good point. Well, thanks for finding a way through to us. I've got another couple of questions, and I have just about got time to pose them. So, still on this issue then of asking what people think. I think a lot of people might have it in their minds that evaluation is, smart is great, right? So things have to be measurable. But one of the things we're measuring here, I think professionals would call it sentiment. How do you feel that this new process or new system is working? Do we need to just perhaps encourage people to be not too uncomfortable themselves with using subjective feedback, as you might get from members of the public, rather than expecting everything to come down to numbers and graphs?
Agreed.
Jonathan first.
Yeah, I was just going to say, no, totally agree with that. And actually, some of our strongest evidence, we had some very good expert other consultants that helped with the A2M2 and pilot that was part of the Intercore European project with some other European partners, that because we'd really planned out carefully as a collaborative team the user acceptance side in terms of pre-test, post-test. So we made sure we got the questionnaires out in time pre-test, and then we had post-test, so we can compare this. What do you think before? What do you think after? What do you think ongoing? And what's your general views as well about speed? We even did a questionnaire on that just to get a view of that. But then ultimately, backed it up with interviews straight after some of the controlled testing, both with the drivers but then stakeholders. And ultimately, some of that subjective impact was very, very powerful. And what we also were able to do as a collective, that one of the consultants looked at the data, and we decided we wanted to match. Say, can we match? Because we knew when they'd gone out on a particular test, can they then match it? They've said they slowed, which is subjective impact. Did they? And actually, on a few cases, we on the samples we did. So yes, even though that's not statistically significant, it clearly showed that someone was saying they were changing their driving behaviour, and they actually were. We could see it with their speed data. So, for example,
I was going to be more surprised if you said some people were saying they changed their driving behaviour, and it turned out they hadn't. I mean, how absurd would that be? Darren.
Yeah. Sorry, I think this comes back to that earlier point about new skill sets and new ways of working. If you evaluate a new roundabout, then it's very numerical. It's very quantitative. That this isn't like that. That this is often about introducing services that the public will use, and so you have to find ways of designing in that qualitative element of that. And again, that's not skills that local authorities generally have. Those are things you will probably need to go to look for new people to bring into the project, new skill sets. But it's very important that designing much more public-facing services where the public has an opportunity to use it or not use it, depending on how well it works, how well it looks, how well it feels. It's increasingly important to think about that qualitative research and evaluation.
And I think something I'd add to that, again from experience, is as you say, Darren, this isn't necessarily something that every authority is getting up to now or is familiar with, and it might feel really rather difficult. Well, it is quite difficult, actually, so don't be put off by the fact that we're asking you to do something that's difficult. introducing a new service is difficult. Remodeling a roundabout is difficult. This is just a different form of something.
Yeah.
The reason there's so much detail in the guidance is it's not impossible. And if you follow through the logic and the diagrams that show you at this stage, you're doing this, and at that stage, do that, go and get some professional help. Make sure that's in your budget at the outset. We'll keep coming back to that. Then we'll get the sort of results that we're hoping for, because for the TTF as a community, getting some evidence that things work is mission critical. If we can't prove that the stuff we're doing is worth the effort, then there are many other deserving causes making their way to grant chaps even as we sit here.
Yeah. And providing that support is exactly what the TTF is here to do. That this is what we're here to do, and help support people in this process, provide guidance, provide links to people that have done it already. The TTF is there to help you with that.
And that really does lead me to my next question. I'm going to come to Darren first this time. So it's one thing for us to sit here this evening and say, whatever the evaluation reveals, it's all grist to the mill. It's all interesting. It might show that the scheme was a tremendous success, and it might show that it really didn't deliver what we were after. Politically, publishing something that says, well, we thought it was going to be great, but actually it wasn't, can be something of a nightmare. So I'm going to ask Darren, what are our expectations about these evaluations being published? And then I'm going to come back to Jonathan on, there are going to be instances where you've been involved in evaluations and perhaps things haven't gone either as well as people had hoped, or they just hadn't turned out as expected. But not bad necessarily, just different. And how has that been handled? But Darren, publication, what's the department's expectation?
We don't really have any, and certainly we fully accept that it can be difficult, and at a local level it can be difficult when schemes don't run that smoothly, and a lot of this work is new and innovative, and it will throw up results that people are not expecting. It still will be great to know that, and it still will be great to have a sight of good and bad evaluation. And we've certainly worked with authorities to look at ways of anonymising bad results, because it is important that the community knows about things that didn't work well. It's important that the sector can learn from that. But we're not in the business of tarring and feathering individual authorities. That doesn't really help anybody. So we would certainly encourage authorities to be open and share bad experiences as well as good, but we would certainly work with them to ensure that we don't make a bad situation worse by then publicly naming and shaming them.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, obviously I totally agree with the sentiments of Darren there as well, and actually, that's part of the function of evaluation. Talks about lessons learned. It's so important to list them, both what you could have done better technology wise, either in your evaluation with the benefit of hindsight and any further work, because what we've found is that some people, we were talking to Australia ITS recently, and they were like, oh, we're really struggling, we must be doing really badly, and like when we looked at what they were doing, they were very good, and they would just come across the same problems all of us were still having, and they were going, oh, but it's difficult to get this data and that data, compare it, isn't it? It was, oh yeah, and don't worry, you're equal to anything that we've seen on any other evaluations on these particular future services. So sometimes as well, it gives people that reassurance that sometimes the problems are shared, and obviously if they keep coming up, it's something that DFT and others, including ourselves, we can look at and help maybe advise better in the future. For example, maybe the guidance isn't explicitly clear enough in a particular area, so we can it should be a living document that is improved based on real user experience, because it's only as good as someone's using it. So yeah, but I think definitely that lessons learned aspect, we would encourage people to list those and be open about those. And in reports, we've done that. We've done it in published reports in Europe, and we still got the money back to UK PLC. We were just, obviously you write it in a way that is all doom and gloom, and ultimately what we say, for example, we didn't do the impact analysis we wanted in certain areas, yet we got other data that was just as valuable. So and there's with everything that we have found difficult, we might have excelled in a different area.
The thing I would say, I'll come back to something I said earlier, is if you are finding something hard to do, quite often that will be because it is hard to do, and it's not because you're not good, just like your Australian contacts were saying, Jonathan. It's because the task is difficult, but just as President John F. Kennedy said in relation to landing on the moon, we choose to do some things because they're hard, but because they're worth doing. And I can't stress too highly, there's a lot of skepticism out there about what transport and traffic technology can actually deliver in the real world, whether things we can't quite engage with in the same ways we can traditional traffic engineering and looking at the design of, say, a roundabout or a split level junction. But if we don't build the evidence case about how deployment has made things better, then the money will ebb away and we'll never be able to do it. And that would kind of be tragedy, and that will be the exact opposite of what the TTF is here to do. So please, everyone left on the call, heed what Darren said. The TTF is supposed to be a community of interest of people who wish to help each other. And by getting this right, we will be able to help each other. I'm now quickly going to turn to my colleague, Paul, who is beautifully blue screened there, despite the fact we can't change our backgrounds here. Otherwise, I'd have chosen something else other than my rather messy house. Paul, what's going on with the TTF?
Yeah, I'm doing the sort of news roundup at the end here, Steve. So I'll try and remember all the things I want to mention. First of all, a date for your diary, almost, which is the next in-person TTF conference that will take place next spring. So for many of us, you'll remember the last in-person event that we went to before the world shut down was our last in-person conference in Bristol in March 2020. To be on the safe side, we've given ourselves an extra couple of months for any winter restrictions to be eased before we get together. We're aiming for Liverpool next May. Exact dates are still being worked out because we're talking to venues who are only now getting used to being fully open, but we should have more details for you early in the new year, and we look forward to seeing you for a couple of days of a free TTF conference in Liverpool in May. We're also planning a couple of meetings for our working groups. A meeting of Spatula and the ASIN Connected Corridor group is being planned for February to build on the show and tell of TTF connected services that we did in York. If you were in York, you'll have seen a really quick fly through of a load of connected vehicle solutions. So we'll be sharing those in more detail in person. And because we're working with ASIN, who, if you don't know, are the Automotive Electronic Systems Innovation Network, will be bringing automotive, roadside infrastructure and comms closer together. There's also going to be a further meeting of our electric vehicle infrastructure working group in the new year. You may have been at the kickoff meeting in Milton Keynes a couple of months ago. Well, we're aiming to go back there in February to deliver our guidance for local authorities who have to be implementing the siting of electric vehicle charging points on their roads. Again, keep out an eye out for details of that. Don't forget our Manual for Smart Streets survey that our friends at the Connected Places Catapult currently have live. It's only 7 questions. It shouldn't take anyone long to complete. It's on the Manual for Smart Streets page on our TTF website, and I'll ask our friends at Elcrig to share a link to it after this webinar so you don't have to go looking for it now. Other things we'll share, I mentioned our York meeting, and we now have all the sessions on our YouTube channel. Although it was a face-to-face event, and very good it was too, we used the kit from our friends at ITS UK to live stream it and record it. So we've topped and tailed all the presentations. They're available for you with details of the SBRI projects we've been involved in, plus, as I mentioned, the Spatula session, and lots of other great content as well, including the award-winning NEVMA project using transport modelling to minimise emissions in Oxfordshire. Do have a look at that. We'll also share another video that you should enjoy if you haven't watched it already. It features our friend Mr. Gooding, and it's all about the connected vehicle project we worked on with the RAC Foundation when we created the world's oldest connected cars, 3 veteran cars from the very dawn of motoring, all around 120 years old, that drove from London to Brighton last month to prove that if they can be connected, all cars can be connected. It's only a 5-minute video, well worth watching. We'll share a link to that. Finally, I'd like to share with you details of a new initiative called Road Safe from our friend of TTF, Nick Reed, who's just been appointed to be the Chief Road Safety Advisor at National Highways. He's produced a short 2-minute video presentation, and we'll play it for you right now.
Thanks very much to Steve Gooding for connecting me to this group, and to Andy and Darren for inviting me to make this video. And my apologies for not being able to join you in person. My name is Nick Reed. I'm an independent consultant working through my company, Reed Mobility. I'm also a trustee of RoadSafe. RoadSafe is a charitable partnership that brings together multiple sectors in the interests of collaboration to improve and deliver road safety. Although RoadSafe itself has a relatively low profile, it is more well known for its projects, including Driving for Better Business, the Prince Michael International Road Safety Awards, and its involvement in the UN's road safety activities. Having been invited to join the RoadSafe board, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and the executive director, Adrian Walsh, invited me to lead a technology working group on behalf of the organisation. We have met roughly monthly since I joined, and our next meeting will, I believe, be our 6th. The membership has grown, and it now comprises the organisations shown on the screen. And as you can see, it includes significant representation from the public, private, and research sectors. The role of the group is to understand and shape how technologies can deliver road safety objectives, in particular, supporting the safe system approach. I attended the recent ASIN conference and noted the partnership between TTF and ASIN. Exploring further, I saw that while TTF's aims are very much aligned with RoadSafe and the technology working group in particular, there is no working group in the TTF that is dedicated to road safety. The question then is whether there is any opportunity for cooperation between RoadSafe's technology working group and the TTF, sitting alongside your existing working groups to focus on road safety technologies. Thanks very much for considering this, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, so that was Nick Reed. There's another invitation for people, and it was quite good to see Nick come up over a picture of what appeared to be either an island off the coast of Scotland or a particularly aggressive alligator coming through the waters. I hope people have found this useful fireside chat. As ever, Darren and the team are up for any feedback people might send. I gather that not all of the broadcast included the rather fabulous images of us as we've been speaking, so apologies if you've been denied an insight into quite how scruffy my house is. We will be planning our next event. Paul has given us a quick run through of a whole host of events that are happening. The TTF is busy, but it's your network, and I invite you to make the most of it. And that's all we've got for this afternoon. Thanks for taking part, and we'll see you at the next one.